So why are we talking about intercultural ministry today at a children's workers gathering? Well, I would say the main reason is because the cultural landscape of the UK and the church is changing. So 16% of the UK population was born abroad. That's about 10.7 million migrants. 18.3% of the total population in England and Wales identifies as non-white. And 37% of the children born in the UK last year have a foreign-born mother. We've only just started and we're already touching on some tricky topics like identity, nationality, foreignness, race, and ethnicity. But how does this apply to the church? So from the census data in 2021, 46% of the UK population identifies Christian. But when you sort that by ethnicity, you get quite a different picture. So white other, which usually means sort of Eastern European, it's closer to 60% Christian. Black African and Black Caribbean populations average about 67% Christian. And many of us are aware of the British National Overseas BNO visa program, allowing Hong Kong citizens and their dependents to live, work and study in the UK with a pathway to citizenship. And there's been an exponential growth in the Chinese church in the UK because many people have migrated from Hong Kong to the UK. In London, the church is highly diverse, with reports indicating at least 60% of Christians are Black, Asian, or from other ethnic minority backgrounds. And some of the Church of England data tells us that 39% of new ordinands are Black, Asian, or ethnic minorities. I was listening to a talk with Harvey Kuyani recently, and he shared the statistic that 58% of immigrants coming to the UK are already Christians, and many want to join churches. It's fair to say that this topic will impact all of us, wherever we live, and our churches. So today we want to explore the ramifications of intercultural church on children's ministry, the impact of culture, language, theology, identity, how we share our faith, disciple children and families, and worship authentically in this evolving landscape. So my job is to set the scene, not to solve all the problems. And I want to just flag up a lot of the topics that may well come up in our discussions later on this afternoon. I am certain that I will not manage to flag up all the issues, but I hope I can warm your hearts and your brains up so that the Holy Spirit can guide us into revelation, repentance, and creative curiosity. So, I'm going to start with the challenges of an immigrant joining a British church. So for most of us, I think we'd agree with the statement that church should feel like home. We expect church to be in a language we understand, or even in our heart language. We want traditions we recognize. We want community where we belong. So most first-generation Christian immigrants will join a church that is similar to their native culture, if one is available where they live. Because it eases culture shock, it's an immediate home from home. They're most likely wanting to keep cultural values and traditions alive, connect with others from their ethnic community, and it's a shortcut to easy community. As most of us know, church is a great place to make friends. It could also be said that perhaps some of these immigrants are not as easily welcomed in white British churches. There are other challenges like language barriers, and across the UK there are 50 denominations, foreign language speaking churches, for example, Polish Catholics, the Romanian Orthodox, the German Lutherans. And it's also a statistic that 65% of new churches planted in the UK are ethnic minority churches. So it might be fair to say that the majority of people moving to the UK, if they're already a Christian, will join what is often called diaspora churches. However, those kind of churches are not available everywhere. They tend to be in urban centres. And if a home away from home diaspora church isn't available locally, where might these immigrants look? They might be looking for an intercultural space, and I'll come on to what that might look like in a bit. But we've also noticed that they often will join Messy Church. The Messy Church I ran in Loughborough had quite a large international contingent to it. It's appealing for those with young children. It's intergenerational. It involves food, which appeals to many cultures across the world. It's social, and it might not be as hard to engage with if your language skills are limited. Now, here are some of the challenges of being part of a diaspora church. It might be less of an issue if you're a first-generation immigrant, but it potentially is not very missional. It's very hard to invite British neighbours, friends, work colleagues, school friends to church if it's in a foreign language, it's not in English, or if there are cultural expectations that that don't match with the new friends you're making? What if you lived in a mixed language or mixed culture household? Where is the right church for you? It's also a challenge for the children. Immigrant children often pick up English faster than their parents and serve as translators. And by their immersion in the school system, they start to become bicultural, living in two worlds, one at home, one at school. Does church echo the style and values of school or of home? And what of the child caught culturally in between? There may be a culture clash in leadership styles and how children are viewed. And that's when they're small. As they grow older, do they feel that they continue to fit in this diaspora church? So here we come on to this idea of intercultural church. What is it? So many of us have discovered in exploring the idea of intergenerational church that there's a big difference between different ages being present in the room, a bit like this picture where the dots are all sort of separate, to a setting where there is true interaction, relationship, mutuality, contribution, and learning from each other. We would call that intergenerational ministry. And the same can be said for intercultural church. It's not the same as different ethnicities and cultures simply being present in our churches. We would call that multiculturalism, but that is not the same as interculturalism. So there are some challenges to think about in intercultural church. We need to think about power dynamics. Which cultures have perceived or real power? Who are the leaders? What languages are spoken or understood? There are concepts of host and guest and expectations on both. We have cultural expectations about time, communication styles, leadership styles, the food we serve, how we dress, how we grieve or celebrate. There is also the culture and worldview of our theologians and how those shape how we disciple and how we preach. There are justice issues that impact some of the cultures in our church more than others. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, really. You have to work quite hard to build relationships across cultures. It's actually easier to be cliquey. And in an intercultural church, there will often be a lot of work about building relationships between cultural groups. Leadership, communication, worship, discipleship, understanding scripture are all impacted by cultural norms and expectations. So thinking specifically about children, different cultures view children and childhood very differently. While all societies acknowledge that children differ from adults, what expectations are placed on them change according to the culture where they live. There's a tendency within the UK and most Western cultures in general to view children as unskilled and dependent. A good example of this is childcare. In the UK, it is illegal for a child under the age of 14 to look after another child unsupervised, because they're deemed incompetent and irresponsible. Work is only legal from age 13 and with lots of restrictions, and properly from age 16. And I'm sure you will know, chores expected from British children are pretty basic if they're expected to do many at all. But this isn't the case around the world. Many societies, children work, whether it's paid jobs, subsistence farming, or doing a pretty impressive range of chores. And they contribute to the family wherever they are from a very early age. For example, Michelle Johnson has written about the Fulani in West Africa, describing by age 4, girls are expected to care for their younger siblings, fetch water, firewood, and by age 6 will be pounding grain, producing milk and butter, and selling these alongside their mothers in the marketplace. Some things that I've noticed in my intercultural relationships. When is it appropriate for new mothers and babies to receive visitors or leave the house? Our Chinese lodger, who had a baby, wouldn't leave the house for the first month after she had the baby. It was called sitting the month. Whereas I was preaching in church the weekend after I had my youngest. Perhaps because I was raised in the US, where mums go back to work 2 weeks after giving birth, compared to a 9-week maternity leave in the UK. Some cultures see it as improper for parents to play with their children. Adults don't play. It doesn't show honour and respect. Whereas other cultures hold up play between adults and children as an ideal. What time should children go to bed? Are primary schoolers expected to be in bed by 7 or 8 p.m? Or do families keep them up late for an evening meal together? If you schedule an evening meeting at church or a house group, are you expecting parents to turn up with or without their children? Are babysitters encouraged or frowned upon unless they're extended family? And then what about education? Should learning be done in silent, respectful rows, favouring memorization and rote learning? Or should children learn through play, discovery, experimentation, and moving around physically? Are you encouraged to ask questions to learn? Or should you listen and accept wholesale what is said to you by the teacher? The style of education experienced in China will value discipline and rigor. Now imagine some of those Chinese Christian parents moving to the UK and volunteering to help in your children's group. What will they make of your curriculum that involves lots of games, cheeky back chat from children, and a lack of Bible memory verses. And there's a challenge that for immigrant families, as I said, the children often pick up English and the culture faster than their parents, that is, and serve as translators. So their immersion in the school system and their bicultural world, living in two worlds, one at home and one at school, they can be caught between church echoing the style and values of school. Which generation has power there? And is the child caught culturally in between their parents' expectations and the expectations of the leaders at church? There's so much to explore here, and not least our theology of the child. Do we view children as innately sinful, or as innocents, full participants in church worship, or junior members who should watch and learn quietly and respectfully? How does your church's gathered worship value or invite contributions from children and youth? And how much of that is cultural? Not just church culture, but an overlay of your culture's expectations of children. Are children noisily waving flags and percussion instruments at the front because we expect children to be noisy? Or at the back with parents trying to keep them quiet because we expect children to be quiet? Are they cute, showing some craft they've made? Or do we expect to receive from them that they can see or hear God more clearly and prophesy without cynicism and follow Jesus with childlike faith? Do children have opportunities to speak, to sing, to pray, to serve, to welcome, to lead, to take communion, ask questions? Or is church primarily an adult space? At what age are you considered an adult or an elder in your culture? Is it 8, 12, 18, 21, or 40 plus? We need to ask all these questions with a healthy dose of humility, reflecting on our own culture, because we haven't always got it right. Whose cultural beliefs about children have shaped our church practices? And we might think we don't actually agree with them, but they are the historical cultural beliefs that we've inherited. So our contemporary pattern of separating children out during church into separate age-related groups only began in the 18th century in the UK through the Sunday school movement, which was primarily an effort to educate poor children who went to work in factories and could not attend school. Because the church was such a big advocate of education, spiritual formation was hugely influenced by the education model. And the church's emphasis on education means separating children out so that they can learn is a pattern that we keep doing. But is it necessarily best for faith formation? So the sticky faith research, which came out many years ago now by Cara Powell, would suggest it's not, that we, and particularly young people, need intergenerational relationships to help us see ourselves through the challenges and transitions of the life of faith. So intergenerational church is like intercultural church. We value many voices contributing, learning from each other, seeing through the eyes of different cultures and generations, the multifaceted diamond that is Christ. So how can we develop intercultural relationships? How can we honor the different ways different cultures see the world and reflect the glory of God? Much of our current thinking about intergenerational ministry, which is a topic we talk a lot about in CMN, came out of early work in Canada in the 1960s around intercultural ideas. They were exploring shifts in thinking post-World War II about human rights, the need to manage cultural diversity, the necessity of addressing historical injustices around Indigenous peoples, and bilingualism. No Canada, they speak French and English as well. And there was loads of reconciliation efforts. And through all of that, they came to some values: mutuality, reciprocity, intentionality, shared leadership and decision-making, empowerment, humility and respect, hospitality and inclusion. Those were challenges to the existing worldview and a provocation that upsets some power dynamics and power structures. And those ideas started out of an intercultural setting, but then got taken into talking about intergenerational ministry. But I keep saying they're potent and important in intercultural because that's the framework where they started. So these two ideas, intercultural and intergenerational, developed in tandem from the same values. And often when I'm speaking about intergenerational ministry, I'm explaining, hey, these practices, yes, they help engage children and young people in worship, but also they help people where English is a second language. They help people with dementia or neurodiversity. There's simply more inclusive ways of engaging worship and discipleship together. So it might be that we need to consider ways that we can prioritize hearing from children, young people, and different cultural voices in discussions and interactive learning. How can we apply these ideas that we've thought about in intergenerational settings to intercultural? Because I think there's so much crossover. I couldn't introduce the idea of intercultural church without raising the issue of justice. If we're looking at types of visas for immigration, the primary driver of migration is economics. Relocating to the UK for study and work is about 32% of the total number of visas that get issued. So people are coming to learn and to serve, and they're a huge gift to us. But war and political instability is a close second. 10% of visas, 110,000 people, claimed asylum in the UK in 2025. But when you ask migrants themselves, the main reason they're moving is to be with family, 37%. What is the church's response to those migrating and seeking asylum? We'll all be aware of the violence and vitriol around nationalism and xenophobia that's been in the news for the last few years. And we also have issues of the legacy of slavery and colonialism, systemic injustice, racism, both individual and institutional, and financial inequality between different cultural groups. Statistically, white British households are 9 times wealthier than Black African households and 10 times wealthier than Bangladeshi households in the UK. So how does this impact our children's ministry? The children in your church will likely be increasingly from non-white British backgrounds and wrestling with bicultural identities. How will they feel seen and heard? How can they contribute and shape what you do? The children's volunteers who lead and help in your churches will likely be parents from different cultures and worldviews. How does that impact your team, communication, content, and training? Cultural awareness is essential for all of us on so many levels. Justice issues are baked into all the things that we're talking about. And it's worth just underlining this point. Different cultures have very different expectations about intergenerational relationships, about how we do discipline, maybe classroom control, you might call it, what's appropriate, what's not appropriate, how they understand leadership. So in all of this, don't make assumptions. In our conversations today, don't make assumptions in small groups. People might you might think by looking at them, you can guess where they're from. But as we've seen from the chat, people are from all sorts of places. So don't make assumptions, be humble, keep learning. And obviously, we're going to talk about all these topics more throughout the day. But if you want to dive deeper on any of these individual topics, I've been learning a lot about this through doing some podcast interviews. And so I've interviewed quite a lot of these people, which have shaped what I've shared with you today. So if you want like a 45-minute conversation on any one of these topics, you can go and listen to that there. As I introduce our keynote speakers later, I'm going to give you other resources that you can notice and follow up on so you can get even deeper into all of this. Right, I'm going to hand over to Glenda, and I think we're going to have a break now.
Excellent. Thank you, Melanie. That's really helpful. And I think it's so good just to bring to the surface all those things that we are aware of, perhaps, but never put them all in one place.